Previously on Drone Wars.
We use radio frequencies to control these kind of craft and guide them to target. I always call an FPV drone like a poor man's smart weapon, effectively. But with a lot of the countering is using a lot of radio frequency jamming to basically block out the command signal. Utilizing very cheap FPV drones to then counter and just turn them into HITARs and just hitting a lot of the ISR drones. But then if you do it enough and you have a lot of the network, which enables you to detect, track and intercept, effectively the Russians' use of the intelligence surveillance reconnaissance drones, it very much limits maneuver, because if you're going to get on a road or get on a track with vehicles, you're going to be spotted. If you're going to be spotted, you're going to be intercepted.
I mean, it is so fascinating to see how, every 2 to 3 weeks something is changing dramatically on that battlefield, right? Let's take a break from Ukraine for a second. Tell us what you're working on right now.
Sure. So I left the army just almost 7 years ago. Initially went to finance, so did the veterans program at a big investment bank.
Yep.
And pretty soon...
How was that?
I managed to find alternative...
There we go. God, he's so polite. Incredible.
No, so I managed to get into a defense drone startup at the time, and we were making interesting weaponized kind of drones for interesting people. Yep. And doing that as chief operating officer for a couple of years, and then having the understanding and the thought process towards kind of starting my own company. And a lot of it is that you learn by discovery, and you learn by doing. And it's a case that one of the biggest things I saw being a challenge is everyone makes really cool drones, but everyone makes some really amazing capability. But a lot of it is like, how do you get that broken into a new jurisdiction where you have to fly it legally? Yep. You have to be within the regulations. And everyone thinks that I'm going to create some amazing technology and the regulators are going to fall at my feet in astonishment of what I've made, but it's not the case.
The answer is they're not doing that.
No, exactly. So how do you work within the existing regulatory framework to get everything through? And so we basically started doing that, started helping other companies doing that. Cool. It was a bit of a consultancy, but which was very linear, doing a lot of the regulatory work, a lot of the training support, operational support, things like that. And over time, we decided we're going to automate a lot of our services to make it scalable. So now we're utilizing large language models to help write our kind of submissions. We're creating operational management systems to help support OEMs, yes, but also drone operators in terms of how they then track everything from maintenance to training to qualifications and all the rest of it. So.
I remember when we were working with Ofcom to do potentially some counter UAS stuff for the prisons, because this was a huge deal 6-7 years ago. Yeah. Just to find space in the UK to fly a drone. Yeah. I think we had to drive like 3 hours outside of London and do it on someone's farm because the amount of regulation that existed was just crazy.
Yeah, and the regulation can be crippling and it can have a long lead time. So, coming from a country which is heavily regulated, lo and behold, we create a kind of a company to try and solve that problem. Yeah. But what we're then finding is that in different jurisdictions, there are different challenges in those areas. Sure. But coming from such a highly regulated area, you can go to other places and just understand how it functions, how it works, and how you kind of translate between as well.
Do you see any loosening of those regulations happening in the near term?
What I find really interesting, and I think it's happening in a lot of countries now, is that people are looking more beyond visual line of sight, saying, the commercial industry needs that to happen. Totally. How do we make that happen? You have lots of these test sites. You have lots of these kind of flight corridors opening up. You have examples where, people are flying blood works out to outer islands in the Outer Hebrides, like overseas, where there's very low risk. And what I find really quite interesting is that the regulators are getting more used to it, and they're inching towards that time where it will become more commonplace. But it's just creating that groundwork first. It's quite interesting.
A lot of baby steps kind of first.
Exactly,
Got it.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of, it seems to be one of those things that starting with the high risk stuff, the blood, the organs, et cetera. But I've been shocked how many folks have approached us, and we're a defense first company before we go dual use, so a little different, that are like, we need to replace the helicopters we have looking at our pipelines, our electrical wires. Like, it seems like this stuff is a no-brainer. It's just going to be a matter of kind of maybe when, not if. Do you see some of the same thing?
The technology is there today.
Totally.
We can do all those things. It's basically getting comfortable with doing those things and doing it safely and doing it within the right construct. So I think that a lot of this is just as you say, taking those baby steps, building confidence. And then I think there's going to be almost like an unleashing of a lot of the technology, which is then going to initially into those very important, the dirty, the dangerous, and the dull type thing.
The 3Ds.
But then as soon as that break-in happens, then I think you'll then see that thin end of the wedge as we get more comfortable in the use of the technology. And a lot of people, I think, especially those who've kind of got into drones in the last few years, kind of post the full invasion of Ukraine, when they think of a drone, they think of a quadcopter. Yeah. But, that's just one propulsion mechanism that's out there, and it's opening people's minds to, when I always talk about FPV, I always talk about it's almost like taking Occam's razor to a capability and stripping out anything that's not relevant to make it work, and saying, look, with a camera and a gyroscope and a data link and some propulsion, you can guide a drone around onto a target. Yeah. And so the propulsion can be a cheap rocket.
Totally.
Yeah, and the control surfaces could be controlled by your flight controller instead of having to be propellers, and like taking people's mindset out of this what they've seen and actually just taking a step back and just looking at capabilities. Like, what do I want to do? What's the end state? What's the effect?
Totally.
And then working back from there.
And what technology do I have in my hands?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Let's take a second, and you're talking to Karl 10 years ago, right? What are the things you've learned over the last decade in this space in particular that you wish you'd known when you started your journey?
I think it's just being bold and just going for it. So, 10 years ago, I was still full-time military, and I was still doing a lot of what I was doing now. Yeah. Around 2017, I started the unofficial drone racing team for the British Army, and we started the same week the Australians did. And we kind of, discovered each other, reached out to each other, and we started talking about having a competition. Good. And then 2018, the first of the military international drone racing tournaments happened down in Sydney. Very cool. And Kieran Joyce down there kind of organised. And I remember getting a letter came through the system, and I got a call from a quite high up officer in the British Army saying, "Are you that random major that's doing this drone thing?" I'm like, "Yeah, we've got everything we need, just give us the flights and we'll get out there." Yeah. We went out there, we experienced it. Yeah. And that was just the realization that this is only going to get bigger. Sure. And so in the next year, I wanted to do the competition in London, in the UK. And then it was all a bit too difficult, and it's all a bit too, it's easy for people to say no instead of yes. Of course. And so it didn't happen. And actually thinking back now, I was kicking myself, because actually fast forward, COVID gets in the way. The Australians and Kieran do their competition in 2023, last year in February. And again, made it happen, brought nations together, and you saw that kind of what can be done. And I kind of said, look, come hell or high water, next year I'm going to do it in the UK. And so just making that happen was really the thing. Yeah. And so if I speak back to myself into kind of 2019, where I allowed the naysayers to kind of say, no, don't do it, and for various reasons, actually, just throwing caution to the wind, being bold, and just pushing it forward no matter what. And we made it happen. We had it in London. We had really good turnouts from really good nations. We put a conference on the side as well to get all that brain power in one place at one time and create that international community. And I don't want to let the cat out of the bag, but there's some interesting stuff happening on that front next year as well.
Good. We like it. Be bold, right?
Yeah.
Drone Wars is recorded from Firestorm's global HQ in San Diego. From our custom-built studio inside one of our hero products, a modular industrial-grade manufacturing facility designed to be deployed anywhere in the world within 24 hours for on-demand drone production. Each week on the podcast, we bring you cutting-edge insights from top industry leaders, sharing the breakthroughs and technologies they're working on, the hard lessons they've learned, and bold predictions that they have for the next 5 to 10 years in autonomous systems and advanced manufacturing. Enjoying the show so far? Then be sure you like and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Now back to the show.
I mean, it's kind of interesting. Like I think every entrepreneur has that moment when they realize that if you fight to yes, you'll actually get what you want to get. But it's just hard to take that initial leap. Right?
I got told by someone the other day that, I like you because you run through walls and you just make things happen. Things just having that tenacity just to make stuff happen, no matter what, I think is important. Yeah. Because if it doesn't, then it's easy to say no, it's easy for it not to happen, but then things never move forward.
100%. Yeah. And again, like there's so much just, I don't know, if apathy or stagnation just in general. A lot of people just go to work, don't want to do anything unique, and
it's almost like
a
lethargy or malaise.
Totally,
kind of falls over people.
Yeah, and I think one of the things, at least you get in California because it's a magnet for so many people who want to run through walls. So I think we do a good job, like as a tech community, of breaking through that. But as someone who lived in the UK for 2 years, like we tried to start our first company there.
Yeah.
It was impossible to raise money. Everybody, like the terms weren't great, but then like, you know, this is early 2010s and there's still some of this now, but like, I felt like people were like not rooting for you, but rooting for you to fail. Do you know what I mean? It was kind of cultural at that point.
There's a different culture towards entrepreneurship in the UK.
Yeah.
There are some good pockets where you got a good support network of people. You really get it.
Yep.
But for the most part, I think, you speak to kind of founders out in the US and they'll say, I've had 2 failed companies, but I'm going for my 3rd. This is my 4th. Yeah. Whereas in the UK, you fail one company and people look at you like, you failed a company. That's the worst thing in the world that could ever happen. So, but you practice by doing, and if you're not failing at things, then you're not trying hard enough at times. So
totally, man. Yeah. And again, I think it's just kind of a shift change from what a lot of the dominant industries have been there. Finance, property, that type of stuff, right?
Yeah. And it's an interesting one because you look at the UK ecosystem as well. And so being in a company kind of in 2018, a previous company that was doing weapons quite early on, couldn't even get a bank account. So how can you create a company when you can't even get a proper bank account? How can you do it where there's not as much of the financing infrastructure there? So it's changing now. It's changing for the positive. But I'm no surprise you found a bit of headwind when you started.
Yeah, I mean, how much of this, like with the Trump election, do you think? And I'm going to lump the UK into Europe, even though it's not anymore. Like, there's going to be a thought of like, okay, the US isn't going to be there. Like, maybe we need to support ourselves. Are you seeing any of those changes?
Yeah,
or discussions?
You're seeing it being discussed because. In my opinion, for the last 80 plus years, we've had the US to effectively underwrite and defend Europe.
Yeah.
And I think what that's led to is over this last period where you've seen, the rapid growth of the disruptive defense industry coming up in the States, we haven't had that as much in Europe because we haven't. It's much less mature and it has much less of the support, even from the financing, even from those underpinning activities that help you create and scale a company and find a market. And I think a lot of it comes down to then the incentives behind companies. So, it seems bolder over in the States in terms of some of the competitions which are set, some of which the reward that can come of it. I remember in 2018, we had a competition which we answered to, and the scale of the reward was a magnitude less than the amount of effort it took to actually put yourself into the fight.
So then why even do it, right?
Yeah,
exactly. I mean, but what's interesting is like the let's call it the talent density in the UK is so massive.
Yeah.
Like Imperial, Cambridge. I mean, you have some of these like incredible schools. We have a lot of smart people from around the world going to go there. And now it's like, if you can align the incentives the right way, I mean, I think the future is super bright.
Yeah, if you look 10, 15 years ago, most people wanted to go into finance, go to a big bank, and that's how they're going to earn their money. Then now it's shifted towards the startups. And, you've got the very big startups. But I think now, especially when a war focuses the mind and brings attention, you've got more people actually looking at defence where they would just entirely ignore it before. And we had a London Defence Tech Hackathon, which was organised by some of the guys, by Richard Pass and some others. And what was really encouraging about that is you saw people actually venturing in to look into defence. So young, talented engineers who never even considered it as a thing, but now they kind of realise that we all live in democracies. We all understand what that means, and that has to be defended. And so people are actually paying much more attention to it.
Yeah, it's been incredible to see, especially young people like coming into this field where they weren't before.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah. All right. So tell me really quickly, like, where do you think, and you can pick what aspect of autonomous systems, right?
Yeah.
What do you think the next 5 to 10 years look like in this space?
I think it's been said a lot kind of recently, drawing the analogies to the First World War and the use of aircraft for the First World War, and very unspecialized, very much kind of thrown together, and then you saw the uptick towards the Second World War, much more. So I think I always draw the analogy of the fighters and the bombers. So a lot of what we're doing at the moment is the bombers trying to achieve their task. And so I think what we're seeing now is increasingly the fighters on the opposing side trying to stop our bombers.
Yep.
And so then what I think you'll see in the next play is fighters on our side defending our bombers against the fighters on the other side, And almost like drawing those immediate analogies, and things become much more specialized and much more linked up in terms of sensor systems, ground-based, air-based, everything like that, just very much meshing together all those networks into a way which is just much more tighter. And the margin of error in terms of timing, I think, is going to get less and less and less. And that phrase kind of moving more at machine speed in terms of having less human interaction in it.
Do you think if and when the war in Ukraine stops, the momentum in this field in the West is going to die? Or do you think like it's already in motion to the point where...
If I was to be a cynic, you could say that that's a risk.
Sure.
But I'd like to think that there's enough incentive out there. At least you look at the countries which border Russia in Eastern Europe, the cessation of any kind of fighting isn't going to be seen as okay, let's now take a breather. It's going to be, okay, let's arm quickly and get prepared. So I think that that's probably going to be where you're going to see a lot of the innovation happening, is more in Eastern Europe. So maybe that'll happen in terms of the foot off the gas potentially in kind of Western Europe, but I don't see that happening in Eastern Europe.
Do you think maybe there's this, I mean, a lot has been made about Ukraine and NATO, right? But then you see Finland and Sweden, who've stayed out of NATO for years, rushing to join. We were in Poland. It's unbelievable how much money they're spending on their military because they view this as an existential threat, right? Like, are you seeing greater coordination between some of the Eastern European countries when it comes to defense, maybe against Russia?
I think that from what you can see, almost in the open press, you can see a lot more attention being drawn, a lot more. I think I was reading the other day in terms of one of the Scandinavian countries kind of giving more information to their populace about kind of what to do in an attack, what to do. So I think it's that preparedness, that mentality of preparedness, I think is very different. I think that, you look at what NATO could bring to bear and actually kind of really just knitting it together in a way which actually is more unified, is more considered than, and actually how we tie up everything, not just about the show of force or show of deterrence, but also the industrial base as well. I think that's going to be where the next play has to happen. I think when you talk about whether Europe will kind of sink or swim, I think that's what's going to hinge on. It's the ability to really kind of bring to bear what is a large industrial base, but at the moment it's not really pulling in one direction in a unified way.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
That's why I want to go put an XL or like 10 in every
Why not?
NATO country. All right. Karl, where can people find you if they want to either contact you or learn more about what you're working on online?
Yeah, sure. So they can find me on LinkedIn. I'm fairly active there. I respond a lot to people reaching out. They can, if they want to look at the midrt.com website, they can see a lot of what's happening on the drone racing. That's very much my passion, very much where I put a lot of my kind of spare energy into. And other than that, a lot of customers, a lot of clients, a lot of companies which are kind of starting up in the space usually kind of come to us when they hit regulatory hurdles and then realize they need them solving. So where there's regulations, that's where you find us.
Great. The regulator breakers.
Thanks for listening to the Drone Wars podcast. Each week, we bring you fascinating conversations with leaders shaping the future of air, sea, land, and space technologies. Catch new episodes every Tuesday wherever podcasts can be found. Until then, we'll see you next time.